There comes a moment when the noise becomes unbearable, not the noise outside of you, but the constant internal pressure to figure everything out, to decode every sign, to chase every possible answer, as if your peace depended on solving a cosmic puzzle. You search for guidance in videos, in predictions, in other people's interpretations of the universe, believing that clarity must be hidden somewhere beyond you. And yet, despite all the information, something still feels unsettled. The more you look outward, the more disconnected you feel inwardly. What if the problem is not that the universe is silent, but that you are asking the wrong part of yourself to listen? The analytical mind, wired for control and survival, tries to interpret intuition as if it were data. It demands guarantees, timelines, and proof. But intuition does not operate under pressure. It does not scream to compete with fear. It emerges in stillness, in coherence, in a nervous system that feels safe enough to soften. When you keep asking for answers from a place of urgency, you reinforce the very state that blocks perception. Anxiety narrows awareness. Emotional tension distorts interpretation. You begin to confuse impulses with insight, fear with guidance, noise with signs. The truth is subtle, and subtle things require presence. In this video, you will not be taught how to force answers out of the universe. You will learn how to recalibrate your internal state so that answers can arise naturally. Because clarity is not found in more seeking, it is revealed when the seeking mind finally becomes quiet enough to hear. The search for certainty often disguises itself as spiritual devotion, yet beneath that search, there is frequently an unspoken tension, a quiet fear of making the wrong move and paying an irreversible price. When the future feels uncertain, the mind accelerates. It scans for patterns, consumes content, replays conversations, and interprets every coincidence as either validation or warning. In this heightened state, the nervous system is not oriented toward wisdom, but toward protection. And protection, while necessary for survival, is not the same as clarity. The paradox is subtle. The more intensely you demand an answer, the more you reinforce the emotional frequency of lack. Urgency communicates absence. It signals internally that something essential is missing, and that message conditions perception. From a neurobiological perspective, anxiety activates threat detection networks in the brain, narrowing attention and prioritizing potential danger. In that state, ambiguity feels unsafe. The mind attempts to resolve discomfort quickly, even if the resolution is premature or inaccurate. What you interpret as intuition may simply be relief from uncertainty. True intuitive perception does not feel like pressure. It feels like coherence. There is a noticeable difference between an impulse driven by fear and a knowing that arises from inner alignment. Fear is loud, insistent, and time-sensitive. It pushes. It demands immediate action. Intuition, by contrast, carries a quiet steadiness. It does not argue, it does not negotiate. It presents itself as a calm recognition, even if the message is uncomfortable. When the body is tense and the breath is shallow, the signal becomes distorted. The mind projects its own agitation onto reality and then calls it guidance. Many people unknowingly seek signs to confirm what they already fear. They interpret neutral events as cosmic messages because their internal state is primed for threat. The mind becomes like a radio slightly off frequency, producing static that masks the music. The message is not absent, it is obscured by interference. That interference is emotional charge. Unfinished reactions, suppressed frustration, unprocessed disappointment. When those states dominate, perception bends toward familiar narratives. There is also a subtle addiction to stimulation that interferes with intuition. Constant exposure to information trains the brain to expect rapid input and immediate feedback. Silence begins to feel uncomfortable, even threatening. Without external noise, unresolved thoughts surface, yet it is precisely within that unoccupied space that intuitive insight becomes accessible. When the body shifts from sympathetic activation into parasympathetic regulation, awareness widens, breathing deepens, muscles soften, the internal environment becomes less defensive. In that state, perception is less reactive and more integrative. Silencing the mind does not mean eliminating thought. It means reducing identification with every thought that appears. When you observe mental activity without immediately engaging it, You create distance between stimulus and reaction. That space is where discernment emerges. Instead of chasing every mental narrative, you begin to notice which impressions carry emotional steadiness and which are fueled by urgency. Over time, this distinction becomes clearer. Asking for answers from a dysregulated state is like trying to read fine print while your hands are shaking. The letters blur, not because the text is unclear, but because the body is unstable. The shift required is not more analysis, but more regulation. When emotional intensity decreases, perception reorganizes. You begin to sense subtle internal signals that were previously drowned out by mental noise. The realization is profound, yet simple. Clarity is less about acquiring information and more about stabilizing perception. The universe does not compete with your anxiety. It resonates with your coherence. When the internal environment becomes less chaotic, insight surfaces without force. What once felt distant begins to feel obvious, not because the answer suddenly appeared, but because the interference finally softened enough for you to recognize what had been there all along. There is a subtle form of spiritual exhaustion that emerges when someone performs connection instead of embodying it. Rituals are repeated, affirmations are spoken, meditations are completed, yet beneath the surface there is tension. The practices become attempts to control outcomes rather than invitations to align internally. When spirituality turns into performance, the external form remains, but the internal coherence fades. The mind seeks reassurance, not transformation. Intuition is often misunderstood as a supernatural event, a sudden flash of knowledge detached from physiology and emotion. In reality, intuitive perception is deeply embodied. It is the integration of memory, emotional intelligence, pattern recognition, and subtle somatic cues operating below conscious awareness. When the internal state is fragmented, when thoughts say one thing, emotions signal another, and the body contracts in resistance, the signal becomes inconsistent. The mind may interpret any strong sensation as guidance, even when it originates from unresolved fear. The expectation that intuition should arrive dramatically is one of the quiet distortions that keeps people searching externally. Movies and stories condition the imagination to expect a voice, a sign, a symbolic event that confirms destiny. But authentic intuitive awareness is often understated. It feels like an alignment of internal signals rather than an external miracle. It carries clarity without adrenaline. It does not need spectacle to validate itself. Another layer of confusion appears when manifestation is approached as a strategy to extract certainty from the future. When someone visualizes desired outcomes while internally fearing disappointment, the emotional frequency remains contradictory. The body memorizes the fear more deeply than the words of intention. Neuroscientific research suggests that repeated emotional states strengthen neural pathways associated with those states. If anxiety is rehearsed daily, it becomes the dominant filter through which possibilities are interpreted. In that condition, intuitive impressions are overshadowed by protective narratives. Silence in this context is not the absence of activity, but the reduction of internal friction. When the breath slows and the muscles release their habitual contraction, the nervous system shifts toward regulation. In regulated states, the brain's networks responsible for integration and creativity become more active. Insight emerges from connection rather than urgency. The water settles, and what lies beneath becomes visible. There is also a tendency to interpret every external coincidence as confirmation while ignoring internal dissonance. A sign may appear aligned, yet the body tightens. The mind rationalizes the tension, labeling it excitement or destiny. However, intuitive alignment rarely produces internal conflict. It may bring challenge, but not contradiction. When the body signals contraction and the mind overrides it, the external sign becomes a projection screen for unresolved desire. The desire for immediate answers often stems from discomfort with ambiguity. Yet, ambiguity is the natural environment of growth. It stretches perception beyond rigid expectations. When ambiguity is resisted, the mind attempts to fill gaps quickly, even if the conclusions are incomplete. In contrast, when ambiguity is tolerated, perception expands. Subtle patterns become recognizable. Emotional nuance becomes informative rather than threatening. There is a profound difference between forcing insight and allowing it to crystallize. Forcing relies on repetition, driven by impatience. Allowing requires emotional steadiness. In states of steadiness, the body and mind synchronize. Thoughts slow down. Sensory awareness increases. Instead of chasing meaning, meaning organizes itself. The realization that emerges from this shift is not dramatic. It is quiet and stabilizing. The need to extract answers softens. The internal environment feels less fragmented. Decisions begin to arise from coherence rather than fear. In that coherence, intuition is not something mystical to pursue. It becomes a natural extension of an integrated nervous system and an aligned emotional state. The universe does not need to shout when the internal noise is no longer overwhelming. There is an internal conflict that rarely receives honest attention: the simultaneous desire for transformation and the fear of what transformation will demand. On the surface, the conscious mind asks for direction, clarity, and purpose. Beneath that request, however, there may be hesitation. Real change threatens familiar identity structures. It challenges relational dynamics, comfort zones, and long-held narratives. When this hidden resistance is present, the search for answers becomes complicated. The mind seeks confirmation for change while the body subtly resists it. This internal dissonance creates a distorted perceptual field. A person may believe they are open to guidance, yet their emotional system contracts around uncertainty. The contraction signals danger, even when no real threat exists. The brain interprets that contraction as evidence that something is wrong. In response, it generates protective thoughts, reinforcing caution and doubt. What feels like intuition in those moments may actually be the echo of self-protection. An important distinction emerges here. Intuition does not generate panic. It may bring clarity that requires courage, but it does not destabilize the nervous system in the way fear does. Fear accelerates heart rate, narrows breathing, and produces urgency. Intuition, even when firm, carries steadiness. It feels grounded. The challenge lies in recognizing this difference when emotional intensity is high. Many people only notice internal signals when they are amplified by anxiety, and they mistake that amplification for significance. When the nervous system remains chronically activated, subtle perception becomes inaccessible. The body stays prepared for defense. Cognitive resources are allocated towards scanning for risk rather than synthesizing insight. Over time, this pattern conditions a person to distrust stillness. Silence feels unproductive, even unsafe. Yet silence is the medium through which integration occurs. Without it, mental narratives dominate. There is also a pattern of attempting to control timing. Answers are expected quickly, and when they do not arrive within imagined deadlines, frustration intensifies. This frustration feeds the very state that obstructs clarity. The more one attempts to rush resolution, the more reactive decisions become. Reactivity may provide temporary relief from uncertainty, but it rarely aligns with long-term coherence. Emotional regulation becomes central in this process. When anxiety arises, it carries information about perceived vulnerability. If that vulnerability is avoided, the anxiety persists and expands. If it is acknowledged internally, without judgment or suppression, its intensity begins to diminish. As intensity decreases, perception reorganizes. Thoughts slow down. The body regains equilibrium. In that equilibrium, intuition has space to surface. Another subtle distortion appears when identity becomes attached to struggle. If someone unconsciously associates growth with hardship, they may overlook moments of ease. They may distrust clarity because it feels too simple. The mind may search for complexity as proof of depth. Yet intuitive knowing often appears uncomplicated. It does not need elaborate justification. It feels internally consistent. Transformation, when authentic, does not demand chaos. It demands alignment. Alignment requires congruence between thought, emotion, and bodily sensation. When these dimensions communicate coherently, decision-making becomes less dramatic. There is less internal debate. The sense of direction stabilizes. In this state, the question shifts. Instead of asking the external world for validation, attention turns inward toward coherence. Does this possibility expand or contract the body? Does it bring calm focus or restless urgency? The answers are subtle, but they are reliable when the internal environment is regulated. The deeper realization is that clarity is not withheld, it is filtered. When fear dominates, the filter distorts perception. When regulation returns, perception clarifies naturally. The universe does not impose confusion. It reflects internal state. As internal conflict softens, guidance feels less like a distant mystery and more like an internal resonance that was always present beneath the noise. There is a quiet avoidance that often hides beneath the constant pursuit of answers. It is not a lack of intelligence or effort, but a subtle resistance to fully inhabiting the present moment. The present carries sensations that are not always comfortable. Unfinished emotions, unresolved conversations, unmet expectations. When attention moves obsessively toward the future in search of direction, it frequently serves as an escape from what feels unsettled now. The mind frames this escape as spiritual seeking, yet its foundation is emotional displacement. The nervous system cannot differentiate between a physical threat and a persistent internal narrative of urgency. When thoughts repeatedly suggest that something crucial must be solved immediately, the body remains on alert. Muscles tighten, breathing shortens, and perception narrows. In that narrowed state, even neutral experiences appear charged with significance. Signs are interpreted through a lens of tension. The more strained the internal environment becomes, the more distorted the interpretation of external events. Silence, therefore, is not merely a spiritual concept, but a physiological shift. It begins when identification with every thought weakens. Thoughts continue to arise, but they are observed rather than obeyed. This subtle distinction changes everything. When a thought appears that predicts failure or promises certainty, it is recognized as mental activity rather than ultimate truth. The emotional charge attached to it gradually loses intensity. As that intensity fades, space opens between stimulus and response. Within that space, perception reorganizes. The body communicates through sensations that were previously overshadowed by mental commentary. A tightening in the chest signals misalignment. A sense of expansion indicates resonance. These signals are often dismissed because they lack dramatic force, yet their reliability increases as internal noise decreases. The process resembles allowing sediment in water to settle. Clarity is not manufactured. It is revealed when agitation subsides. There is also a misconception that silence implies passivity. In reality, silence sharpens awareness. It enhances sensitivity to nuance. It allows subtle distinctions to become noticeable. When silence deepens, the compulsion to interpret every coincidence as destiny diminishes. External events are no longer burdened with exaggerated meaning. Instead, meaning arises organically from internal coherence. Patience plays a crucial role in this unfolding. The demand for immediate answers reflects a belief that certainty guarantees safety, yet safety derived from rigid certainty is fragile. True stability emerges from adaptability, from the ability to remain regulated even when outcomes are unknown. When the present moment is no longer avoided, ambiguity loses its threat. It becomes a field of possibility rather than a void to be filled. Questions themselves begin to change in quality. Instead of asking for guarantees, inquiry shifts toward alignment. The focus moves from predicting outcomes to sensing internal truth. This shift alters the emotional tone of seeking. The search becomes less frantic and more reflective. Insight appears not as a sudden revelation, but as a quiet convergence of thought, feeling, and bodily awareness. The internal environment becomes more consistent. Emotional spikes lessen in frequency. The mind feels less compelled to analyze every variable. Decisions arise from steadiness rather than urgency. Even when uncertainty remains, it does not produce the same agitation. There is a growing trust in the capacity to respond to what unfolds. In this state, the relationship with the universe transforms. It is no longer a distant authority expected to provide immediate answers. It becomes a mirror of internal coherence. When the internal state is chaotic, experience feels chaotic. When the internal state is regulated, perception feels ordered. The answers that once seemed elusive begin to feel accessible, not because they were granted from outside, but because the internal field finally became quiet enough to recognize them. What once felt like confusion begins to reveal itself as interference. The answers were never absent, only obscured by urgency, emotional contraction, and the relentless demand for certainty. Throughout this journey, a deeper pattern becomes clear. The mind searches for direction in noise because it has forgotten how to trust stillness. Yet intuition has never operated through force. It emerges when internal resistance softens, when the nervous system stabilizes, and when perception is no longer distorted by fear. Clarity is not a reward granted by external validation. It is a natural byproduct of coherence. When thought, emotion, and body align, insight surfaces without drama. The need to chase signs dissolves. The compulsion to interpret every event as a cosmic message fades. What remains is a grounded awareness that feels steady rather than urgent. In that steadiness, decisions carry less anxiety and more resonance. The future stops feeling like a threat that must be controlled and begins to feel like a field that can be navigated. Silencing the mind does not mean suppressing it. It means releasing identification with its constant commentary. As that identification loosens, intuition becomes distinguishable from impulse. Guidance feels less like a mystery and more like recognition. The universe does not withhold direction. It reflects internal state. When internal noise quiets, perception clarifies naturally. If the answers have been within you all along, what would change the moment you truly trusted your capacity to hear them? Subscribe to this channel to continue deepening this level of awareness, and keep watching the next video on your screen to expand this connection even further.